Chapter 4 of The Side of the Angels by Basil King. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 4. Beside his favourite window at the club, commanding the movement of the street and the bare trees of the park, Len Willoughby had got together the essentials to a pleasant hour. They consisted of the French and English illustrated papers, 2 or 3 excellent Havanas, a bottle of Scotch whisky, and a siphon of aerated water. On the table beside him there was also an empty glass that had contained a cocktail. It was the consoling moment of the day. After the strain of a 9 o'clock breakfast and the rush to the city before 11, after the hours of purposeless hanging about the office of Toogood and Masterman, where he could see he wasn't wanted, he found it restful to retire into his own corner and sink drowsily into his cups. He did sink into them drowsily, and yet through well-marked phases of excitement. He knew those phases now. He could tell in advance how each stage would pass into another. There was, first, the comfort of the big chair and the friendly covers of l'Illustration and the Graphic. He didn't care to talk. He liked to be let alone. When he came from the office he was generally dispirited. Masterman's queer, contemptuous manner was enough to discourage anyone. He was sure, too, that Claude and Billy Cheever ridiculed his big fat figure behind his back. But once he sank into the deep red-leather armchair, he was safe. It was ridiculous that a man of his age should come to recognize the advantages of such a refuge, but he laid it to the charge of a mean and spiteful world. The world did not cease to be mean and spiteful till after he had had his cocktail. It was wonderful the change that took place then, not suddenly, but with a sweet, slow, cheering inner transformation. It was a surging, a glowing, a mellowing. It was like the readjustment of the eyes of the soul. It was seeing the world as generous, kindly. It was growing generous and kindly himself, with the happy conviction that more remained to be got out of life than he had ever wrung from it. Still, it was something to be a rich banker. Everyone couldn't be that. Archie Masterman had certainly possessed a quick eye when he singled out Len Willoughby as the man who could put the firm of Toogood and Masterman on its feet. $300,000 of Bessie's money had gone into that business in 1892, just in time to profit by the panic of 1893. Lord, how they had bought gilt-edged stocks for next to nothing, and how they had sold a few years later. Len never knew how much money they made. He supposed Archie didn't either. There were years when the stock exchange had been like a wheat field, yielding 30-fold and 60-fold and 100-fold for every seed they had sown. He had never attempted to keep a tally on what came in. It was sufficient to know that there was always plenty to take out. Besides, it had been an understanding from the first that Archie was to do the drudgery. Len liked this, because it left him free for summers in Europe and winters in Egypt or at Palm Beach. By degrees, reminiscence tended towards somnolence. Yet it couldn't be said that Len slept. He kept sufficiently awake to put out his hand from time to time and seize the tumbler. He could even brew himself another glass. If a brother clubman strolled near enough to say, "Hello, Len," or "Hello, Willoughby," he could repeat with a dull, "Hello, Tom," or "Hello, Jones." But he spoke as out of depth. He spoke with some of that weariness of being called back to life which Rembrandt depicts on the face of Lazarus rising from the tomb. It was delicious to sink away from the prosaic and the boresome, to be so fully awake that he could follow the movement in the street and the hopping of the sparrows in the trees, and yet be, as it were, removed, enchanted, seeing and hearing and thinking and even drinking through the medium of a soothing, slumberous spell. It could hardly ever be said that he went beyond this point. Though there were occasions on which he miscalculated his effects, they could generally be explained as accidental. Above all, it didn't rise from an appetite for drink. The phrase was one he was fond of. He often used it in condemning a vice of which he disapproved. He used it on this particular afternoon, when 4 Mastermen, who had come to drive him homeward in his runabout, were sitting in the opposite armchair, waiting to make the start. "There's one thing about me, Thor, never had an appetite for drink. Not to say drink. Thing I despise. Your father's all wrong about me. Don't know what's got into him. Thinks I take too much. Rot, that's what it is, bally rot. You know that, Thor, don't you? Appetite for drink, something I despise." Thor considered the moment one to be made use of. "His father been saying anything about it?" "No, but he looks it. Suppose I don't know what he means? Sees double, your father does. Anybody'd think from the way he treats me that I was a disgrace to the firm. I'd like to know what that firm would be without me." Thor tried to frame his next question discreetly. "I hope there's been no suggestion of the firm's doing without you, Mr. Willoughby?" To this Len gave but an indirect reply. "Oh, there'll be one soon, if your father don't mind himself. I'll retire, take my money out. Where'll he be then?" Thor felt his way. "You've taken out a great deal already, haven't you?" "Not any more than belong to me. You can bet your boots on that." "No, not any more than belong to you, of course. I was only thinking that with the splendid house you've built, and its upkeep, and your general expenses, which are pretty heavy, aren't they?" "Not any more than belong to me, Thor. You can bet your boots on that." The repetition was made drowsily. The big head of bushy white hair, with its correlative of bushy white beard, swayed with a slow movement that ended in a jerk. It was obvious that the warnings and admonitions to which Thor had been leading up were not for that day. They were useless, even when, a half-hour later, the movement of the runabout and the keen air of the high lands as they approached the village roused the big creature to a maudlin cursing of his luck. On nearing the house, the delicate part of the task which of late Thor had taken almost daily on himself became imminent. It was to get his charge into the house, up to his room, and stretched on a couch without being seen by Lois. Thor had once caught her carrying out this duty unaided. She had evidently called for her father in her mother's limousine, and as Thor passed down the village street, she was helping the staggering, ungainly figure towards the door. The next day Thor took his runabout from the garage and went on the errand himself. He was also more ingenious than she in finding a way to which the sorry object could be smuggled indoors. The carriage entrance of the house was too near the street. That it should be so was a trial to Mrs. Willoughby, who would have preferred a house standing in grounds, but there never had been any help for it. When money came in, it had been Len's desire to buy back a portion of the old Willoughby farm and build a mansion on what might reasonably be called his ancestral estate. Of this property there was nothing in the market but a snip along County Street, and though he was satisfied with the site as enabling him to display his prosperity to everyone who passed up and down, his wife regretted the absence of a dignified approach. By avoiding County Street when he came out from town, and following a road that scrambled over the low hillside till it made a juncture with Willoughby's Lane, by descending that ancient cow-path and bringing Len to the privacy of his side door, Thor endeavoured to keep his father's partner from becoming an object of public scandal. He took this trouble not because he bothered about public scandal in itself, but in order to protect Lois Willoughby. So far his methods had been successful. They failed today only because Lois herself was at the side door. With a pair of garden shears in her gloved hands, she was trimming the leafless vine that grew over the pillars of the portico. Thor could see, as she turned round, that she braced herself to meet the moment's humiliation, speaking on the instant he drew up at the steps. "So good of you to bring Papa out from town. I'm sure he's enjoyed the drive." Her hand was on the lever that opened the door of the machine. "Poor Papa, you look done up. I dare say you're not well. Be careful now," she continued, as he lumbered heavily to his feet. "That's a long step there. Take my hand. I know you must be as tired as can be." "The dog's hard," the father complained, as he lowered himself cautiously. "Dog's life, that's what I need. No thanks for it either. Damn!" The imprecation was necessary because he missed his footing and came down with a jerk. "Can't you see I'm getting out?" he groaned peevishly. "Stay right in my way." "Better leave him to me," Thor whispered. "I know just what to do with him. One of the advantages of being a doctor." Willoughby had mind enough to clutch at this suggestion. "Doctor's what I want, hang it all. Sick as a dog. I don't know what'll happen to me some day. Headaches fit to split. Never have appetite for drink. That's one good thing about me." Lois was still standing near the portico when Thor had assisted his charge to his room, stretched him on a couch, covered him with a rug, left him in a heavy sleep, and crept down the stairs again. It did not escape his eye, quickened by the minutes he had spent with Rosie Fay, that Lois lacked colour. For the first time in his life he acutely observed the difference between a plain woman and a pretty one. "Oh, Thor," she began as soon as he came out, "I don't know how to thank you for your kindness to Papa. How is it to go on? Where is it to end? Oh, Thor, you're a doctor. Tell me what you think. Is there anything I can do?" His kind, searching eyes, as he stood with one hand on the steering wheel, rested on her silently. After all, she was 27 and must take her portion of life's responsibilities. Besides, whatever she might have to bear, he meant to share it with her. She should not be obliged, like Rosie Fay, for instance, to carry her load alone. And yet she didn't look as if she would shirk her part. With that tall, erect figure, delicate in outline but strong with the freedom of an open-air life, that proud head which was nevertheless carried meekly, and that straightforward gaze, she gave the impression of being ready to meet anything. The face might be irregular, lacking in many of the tender prettinesses as natural to other girls, even at 27, as flowers to a field, but no one could deny its force of character. "I'll tell you something you could do," he said at last. "You could see, or try to see, that he doesn't spend too much." A slight pause marked his hesitation before adding, "that no one spends too much." "You mean Mamma and me?" He smiled faintly. "I mean whoever does the spending, but your father most of all, because I'm afraid he's rather reckless. He's spent a good deal during the last 12 or 15 years, hasn't he?" She was very quick. "More than he had a right to spend?" "Well, more than my father," he felt it safe to say. "But he had more than your father to spend, hasn't he?" "Do you know that for a certainty?" "I only know it from Papa himself. But, oh, Thor, what is it? Why are you asking?" He ignored these questions to say, "Couldn't your mother tell us? After all, it was her money, wasn't it?" She shook her head. "Oh, Mamma wouldn't know. If you're in any doubt about it, why don't you ask Mr. Masterman? He could tell you better than anyone. Besides, Mamma isn't in." He spoke with a touch of scorn. "I suppose she's in town." The tone evoked on Lois's part a little smile. They had had battles on the subject before. "That's just where she is." "That's just where she always is." "Oh, no, not always. Sometimes she stays at home. But she's there pretty often, I admit. She has to make calls, partly because I won't, when I can help it." He spoke approvingly. "You at any rate don't fritter away your time like other women." "It depends on what other women you mean. I fritter away my time like some women, even though it isn't like the women who make calls. I play golf, for instance, and tennis. I even ride." "All the same, you don't like the silly thing called society any more than I do." There was daylight enough to show him the blaze of bravado in her eyes. Her way of holding her head had a certain daring, the daring of one too frank, perhaps too proud, to shrink at truth. "Oh, I don't know. I dare say I should have liked society well enough, if society had liked me, but it didn't. As Mamma says, I wasn't a success." To compel him to view her in all her lack of charm, she added, with a persistent smile, "You know that, don't you?" He did know it, though he could hardly say so. He had heard Claude descant on the subject many a time in the years when Lois was still putting in a timid appearance at dances. Claude was interested in everything that had to do with girls, from their clothes to their complexions. "Can't make it out," he would say at breakfast after a party. "Dances well, dresses well, but doesn't take. Fellow's afraid of her. Everybody's shy of a girl who isn't popular. Hasn't enough devil. A girl ought to have some devil, hang it all. Dance with her myself? Well, I do, about 3 times a year. Have her left on my hands an hour at a time. Fellow can't afford that. Think we have no chivalry? Should come to dances yourself, old chap. You'd be a godsend to the girls in the dump." Thor's dancing days were over before Lois's had begun, but he could imagine what they had been to her. He could look back over the 4 or 5 years that separated her from the ordeal, and still see her in the dump, tall, timid, furtively watching the young men with those swimming brown orbs of hers, wondering whether or not she should have a partner, heartsore under her finery, often driving homeward in the weary early hours with tears streaming down her cheeks. He knew as much about it as if he had been with her. He suffered for her retrospectively. He did it to a degree that made his long face sorrowful. The sorrow caused Lois some impatience. "For mercy's sake, Thorn, don't look at me like that. It isn't as bad as you seem to think. I don't mind it." "But I do," he declared, with indignation, only to feel that he was slowly colouring. He coloured because the statement brought him within measurable distance of a declaration which he meant to make, but for which he was not ready. She seemed to divine his embarrassment, speaking with forced lightness. "Please don't waste your sympathy on me. If anyone's to be pitied, it's Mamma. I'm such a disappointment to her. Let's talk of something else. Where have you been today, and what have you been doing?" He was not blind to her tact, counting it to her credit for the future, and asked her abruptly if she knew Fay, the gardener. "Fay the gardener?" she echoed. "I know who he is." She went more directly to the point in saying, "I know his daughter." "Well, she's having a hard time." "Is she? I should think she might." His face grew keener. "Why do you say that?" "Oh, I don't know. She's that sort. At least, I should judge she was that sort from the little I've seen of her." "How much have you seen of her?" "Almost nothing. But little as it was, it impressed itself on my mind. I went to see her once at Mr. Whitney's suggestion." "Whitney? He's the rector at St. John's, isn't he? What had he to do with her? She doesn't belong to his church." Lois explained. "It was when we established the branch of the Girls' Friendly Society at St. John's. Mr. Whitney thought she might care to join it." "And did she?" "No, quite the other way. When I went to ask her, she resented it. She had an idea I was patronizing her. That's the difficulty in approaching girls like that." He looked at her with a challenging expression. "Girls like what?" I mean girls who haven't much money, or who've got to work." He still challenged her, his head thrown back. "They probably don't consider themselves inferior to you for that reason. It wouldn't be American if they did. And it would be American if I did, and I don't. They only make me feel so because they feel it so strongly themselves. That's what's not American. And it isn't on my part, but on theirs. They force their sentiment back on me. They make me patronizing whether I will or no." "And were you patronizing when you went to see Miss Fay?" To conceal the slightly irritated attentiveness with which he waited for her reply, he began to light his motor lamps. Condescension towards Rosie Fay suddenly struck him as offensive, no matter from whom it came. "I'm sure I don't know," she replied indifferently. "There was something about her that disconcerted me." "She's as good as we are," he declared, snapping the little door on one of the lanterns. "I don't deny that." "A generation or two ago we were all farming people together. The Willoughbys, and the Brands, and the Thorleys, and the Fays were on an equal footing. They worked for one another and intermarried. The progress of the country has taken some of us and hurled us up, while it has seized others of us and smashed us down. But we should try to get over that when it comes to human intercourse." "That's what I was doing when I asked her to join our friendly society." "The deuce you were! I know your friendly societies. Keep those who are down, down. Help the humble to be humbler by making them obsequious." "You know nothing at all about it," she declared with spirit. "In trying to make things better, you're content to spin theories while we put something into practice." He snapped the door of the second lamp with a little bang. "Put something into practice with the result that people resent it." "With the result that Rosie Fay resented it, but she's not a fair example. She's proud and rebellious and intense. I never saw anyone just like her." "You probably never saw anyone who had to be like her because they'd had her luck. Look here, Lewis," he said with sudden earnestness, "I want you to be a friend to that girl." She opened her eyes in mild surprise at his intensity. "There's nothing I should like better, if I knew how." "But you do know how. It's easy enough. Treat her as you would a girl in your own class. Elsie Darling, for instance." "It's not so simple as that. When Elsie Darling came back after 5 or 6 years abroad, Mamma and I drove into town and called on her. She wasn't in, and we left our cards. Later we invited her to lunch or to dinner. I should be perfectly willing to go through the same formalities with Miss Fay, only she'd think it queer. It would be queer. It would be queer because she hasn't got, what shall I say? She hasn't got the social machinery for that kind of ceremoniousness. The machinery means the method of approach, and with people who have to live as she does, it's the method of approach that presents the difficulty. It's not as easy as it looks. Very well then, let us admit that it's hard. The harder it is, the more it's a job for you. There was an illuminating quality in her smile that atoned for lack of beauty. "Oh, if you put it that way." "I do put it that way," he declared, with an earnestness toned down by what was almost wistfulness. "There are so many things in which I want to help, Lois, and you're the one to help me." She held out her hand with characteristic frankness. "I'll do anything I can, Thor. Just tell me what you want me to do when you want me to do it, and I'll try." "Oh, there'll be a lot of things in which we shall have to pull together," he said as he held her hand. "I want you to remember, if ever any trouble comes, that—" he hesitated for a word that wouldn't say too much for the moment, "that I'll be there." "Thank you, Thor. That's a great comfort." She withdrew her hand quietly. Quietly, too, she assured him, as she moved towards the steps, that she would not fail to force herself again on Rosie Fay. "And about that other matter, the one you spoke of first, you'll tell me more by and by, won't you?" After her capacity for ringing true, his conscientiousness prompted him to let her see that she could feel quite sure of him. "I'll tell you anything I can find out, and one of these days, Lois, I must say a lot more." She mounted a step or two without turning away from him. "Oh, well," she said lightly, as though dismissing a topic of no importance, "there'll be plenty of time." But her smile was a happy one, so happy that he who smiled rarely smiled back at her from the runabout. He could scarcely be expected to know as yet that his pleasure was not in any happiness of hers, but in the help she might bring to a little creature whose image had haunted him all the afternoon, a little creature whose desperate flower-like face looked up at him from a background of poinsettias. End of chapter 4.